Hello and good afternoon and good morning to those over the Atlantic in the US. We are here for the April Bytesize, and this time we're doing something a little bit different. I'm not going to be your host. I've actually got a host with me today who is a lot more technically minded. It is Cei Sanderson, who's the VP of Products. Hi Kai, how are you doing today?
Hi Ben, it's very nice of you to say I'm technical. Nice to talk to you again.
Yeah, and you. So we've got a lot in store today, a lot of content to get through. I will pass the baton over to you as the host for today and wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Hey everybody, this is exciting and it's nice to be on the other side of the virtual room. I've got two great guests to come on and do a bit of a deep dive into some of the fundamental concepts of the DVM. That's the world of offer management. You saw it in that video at the start. Offer management is one of our core capabilities. So it's really a product and engineering takeover today. So first, let me introduce Jo Parsons. She's the group product manager here at Bango. Jo's been with the company about 3.5 years, and she's been focused all that time on subscription and bundling strategy with the DVM. Prior to Bango, Jo was in finance, working across benefits and loyalty schemes as well. So she is the expert. She's got two dogs, which may well make an appearance on the video call today, and hopefully they will be on best behavior. I'm also joined today by David Green, his principal software engineer here at Bango. He started in prime brokerage in London and then moved to Cambridge and joined Bango about 4 years ago, linking up with Jo as a product team to help build out that Bango vision for entitlement management, subscriptions and bundling. Thank you both for coming on today.
Thank you. Hello.
So first off, Jo, terminology in this domain is really, really important to get right. So what exactly is DVM and what is an offer?
Okay, so DVM, it's basically an all-in-one subscription bundling standard, and it's really the most powerful way for content providers to grow their global product distribution with the widest network of resellers, and that kind of includes telcos, ISPs, banks, retailers. And it's also a really powerful way for resellers to bundle and sell the widest range of top subscription services that allow them to acquire, engage, and retain more customers and help them grow revenues. And an offer is really the act of presenting a product or service to the market for sale with specific price terms, such as 1 month free, 7-day free trial, or possibly a discounted price. And the example you can see on screen is Modello Continente, which is a Disney Plus offer with a discounted price for 3 months. But offers aren't just about a specific service. It's also related to the tier of the service or product that's being sold, for example, standard with ads or premium. And there are often things like eligibility rules associated to it as well. So, you're not eligible for the offer unless you're a Continente customer. And this particular one is an example of a successful but quite simple offer, and they can get quite complicated. So, for example, if we were to look at Telenet, which is a telco in Belgium, you can see here that they're offering a couple of different types of offers. One is a fixed subscription bundle for Netflix and streams. They've also got a sort of build your own bundle with a 5% discount. So if you pick 2 or more of their subscription offers across the bottom. And this gets complicated primarily because of the number of what-if scenarios, which can basically grow exponentially when you add more products and more flexible pricing to the mix. So, for example, with fixed bundles, what happens if the consumer couldn't access one of the entitlements that they basically purchased as part of that fixed bundle? Was it a technical issue? Do you retry? Maybe it was an eligibility issue. And discount bundles can be challenging as well. When is the discount applied? Is it in advance? Is it in arrears? Only after certain sort of things like free trials have ended. And basically, the more variations you offer, the more complicated it becomes.
Okay, so that's really some flexibility and choice that Telenet are providing specifically to their consumers right now. But obviously, in your role in the product team and as group PM, you're not just looking at what resellers and content providers are doing right now, but you're looking at the evolution of subscription bundling industry. What are you seeing right now?
A lot of change in the market at the moment. We're seeing a lot of substantial growth in sales through indirect channels. And really, to stand out from the crowd, companies are having to put together bigger and better bundling offers. And this, in turn, is actually resulting in more sophisticated customer base with more demands. And what we're seeing, therefore, is an increase in flexibility in the type of offer. So instead of just a sort of first and third party bundle, we're seeing more multi-third party fixed bundles or discount offers. We're seeing different underlying models as well, like pick 2 from 5, or the ability to switch subscriptions every few months for the same ongoing price. And a lot more variety in pricing models as well. So it's not just a fixed price or discount anymore. There's things like add-ons, pay-per-view, top-ups, cashbacks. There's now so many ways. You start with a simple offer, and then you build up that perfect bundle for you. And we already know that there's a direct link between the average order value and customer retention. And your customer is far more likely to stay with you for longer if they've bought a higher value offer. And that basically becomes a win for everyone. So your customers get a better, more personalized bargain. And as a company, you retain your paying customers for longer. So it really just shows that flexible bundling is really a key go-to-market strategy as it improves acquisition and reduces churn. But building for this landscape and all the variety is really hard. Even a simple offer with one third party can take months to get to market. And that's why about 67% of the market only offers that single service, because it's the easiest thing to implement. What you really need is flexible offer management technology, readily available both before and after you want to launch an offer.
Wow, and 67%, that's a great stat. But it's pretty clear that to get the flexibility and choice that you want for the consumer, the product and the technology that supports it needs to be flexible as well. The data we've had from Omdia, 30% of all SVOD is already sold through indirect channels. So we can kind of conclude from that there's a huge market of opportunity to be part of this. And so getting that flexibility, getting that choice in front of the consumer brings us nicely onto what you and David are talking about today. So unpacking it and opening the lid on DVM. David, you've got 3 problems in relation to designing for this flexibility and choice and the evolution of subscription bundling.
Yeah, I mean, we could literally talk about this stuff for hours, but we've got limited time. So we've sort of picked 3 key areas to focus on. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the technology side of that, and it does align very closely with product. So I guess point 1 is that complexity Joe was talking about and the evolution of the subscriptions landscape and bundling, etc. What we really need is flexibility. So that is really our ability to quickly adapt and offer more complex bundling opportunities rapidly. So we need a platform that's capable of sort of turning and pivoting when it needs to. Secondly, it's really about scale at this stage. So consumer facing, essentially, scale, you're talking tens of millions, hundreds of millions of subscriptions. So we need a platform that is ready for the long term and won't become impeded by any kind of architectural choices on that. But even short term, we already see sort of bursty type peak loads where someone might do a marketing campaign and the systems get busy. So dealing with sort of peaks and troughs of traffic is something we already handle, and that's one of our concerns. And then lastly, we don't want to scare anyone with this because things do go wrong, and we've got some slides on that later. We're cognizant of that fact, and really our focus is on making sure that it doesn't really matter what goes wrong, and that could be like a complete catastrophic power failure through to just a temporary network glitch. And what we're trying to do is make sure that the systems always have correct data. If there is a problem, we can step over it and we can resolve it. And we can guarantee that once we've had those problems, we can set the system back into a completely correct state.
Yeah, we've got a very, very relevant case in point with this week with the power cuts in Portugal and Spain that brings in that things can go wrong and will go wrong point. So let's jump into designing for flexibility. And Joe, beyond what we've already talked about with Telenet and the examples that you're seeing in the market, do you have some examples beyond that about flexibility?
Sure. So let's look at a very specific example. So let's say you've initially created a very simple offer, and the subscription for the billing starts when the consumer has activated the service. Then that's fine. And then a few months later, there's a requirement to create a different offer with a different content provider. But this time, the subscription model is slightly different. This time, the billing will start when the service is set up, regardless of whether or not the consumer has actually activated it. From our perspective, this is a configuration rule. But if you haven't considered this as a possibility, it's going to take more time for development and it's going to slow your time to market.
So we're talking about configuration over code there to reduce any of that tiresome coding in order to get something out to market. But it sounds still fairly straightforward.
Yes, for a simple offer. But when the offer starts to get more complicated, like a fixed bundle with multiple services, it starts to get more complicated. So your subscription could start when all of the services within the offer have been created, or all of the services within the offer has been activated. But there could be another scenario where the subscription starts when the consumer has activated at least one option within that bundle.
Okay, so I see what you mean. So as we go through those flexible bundling strategies, the more variations you have to consider.
Exactly that. And another example is upgrades. So again, remembering that an offer is linked to a tier of the product. If the consumer is upsold a better tier during activation, or really at any point during the life cycle of the subscription, you've got to be able to handle price changes, proration, etc.
Okay, so David, how do you design a system that's capable of building for the future and unknown flexibility?
Okay, well, I mean, you've kind of already alluded to design, really. So the first thing that we don't do is start prototyping or setting a goal to get something into production as soon as possible. We stand back. In fact, we stop, look, listen, think, and we discuss things, analyze things, and plan. We will design a model. That model isn't just a data model; it'll be a processing model as well. And that model will be concrete, but only kind of against what we consider like a framework, effectively. And then we'll look at that and go, right, given all the requirements and features that we currently have, does that model still work for it? And if it does, then it's good. And then we'll go on to the next iteration, which is effectively for throwing curveballs at it. So we'll try and break it, and we'll think of all the ways that all of our different partners behave and anything anyone can possibly imagine, really, to break the system. And that goes as far as, well, what would happen if there's a sudden power cut? What happens to the system? So it's not just the data and the processing in business terms, it's the sort of life cycle, even in the event of a failure. Anyway, we break that down, build it back up again, and rinse and repeat until we have a model that we think is good. Once we've finalized, we document that. This is all, it sounds all very waterfally, but I mean, we're not brutal about the schemas necessarily. We know that some of these things will be sort of fully discovered during implementation. But we still document it. We sort of say the what and the why, and then basically we build. And that's how we build a system that's carefully planned. I would add one small point, which is sometimes these things are good to sleep on. So you'll go away for the evening and come back the next day with a completely different spin. So it's not just sit in a room and do it as rapidly as possible. It's a case of sort of taking your time and moving slow to go fast. So I do have an example actually, which is when we were designing the subscriptions engine, and this will sort of come back later in some of the latest slides, which is when we were talking about the requirements for a subscriptions engine, we stood back and we realized that we weren't really building a subscriptions engine. We were building a framework for billing, of which subscriptions is just one particularly specialized type of sort of renewable payment plan. So that thinking essentially gives us the flexibility to attach new things to the platform.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense, and I like the I suppose less haste, more speed, right? That's how you get flexibility, is getting that core bit right. But what happens if you don't design this way?
Well, okay, so my personal take is that a pure delivery, minimum viable product, get it shipped as soon as possible focus effectively creates instantaneous tech debt. It always got a very high chance of doing that. So, for example, if you build it to a requirement, you put it into the data model, that feature becomes a constraint because the data model is pretty much the hardest thing to change in these things. And any kind of commitments to go back and revisit and sort of redesign, they're nice, but they don't happen in reality. So you end up with a constrained design, and then you end up having to build on that constrained system. And workarounds, they end up being time consuming. They can be very complex. There's a lot of risk from doing that. Ultimately, you can impact performance. And while you're doing that, priorities are backing up, opportunities are being lost, and costs basically rise all the time. It's not good for long-term business growth, in my opinion.
No, I totally agree. That kind of approach. That's why you choose a SaaS vendor that's spent all this time to work on it, right? So, I mean, MVP, that sends the shudder down my spine for anyone who knows how I talk about products. You know, MVP is a thing you never build on again. But let's move on swiftly from that. Joe, can you talk us through an example pipeline about how this sort of flexibility and how we embrace change has been successful?
Sure. So what you're looking at here is basically a very sort of standard content delivery model through a reseller. That consumer offer goes into our sort of control plane, if you like, our sort of standard flows for entitlements. We then have a subscription renewal process that then calculates the billing and sends out charging. But then the model can change. So, for example, if you then have a one-off actual physical good like a games console, that has still goes through the same control flows, or it can do. And then actually the payment terms might be completely different. It could be transactional, you could pay for it in one hit, or similarly, it could be sort of monthly installments and you pay it back over 12 months. And then that has a slightly different calculation, but again, it still results in a charge. And then, take that to the next level again, you can end up with something completely different. So this could be something, we don't do this, but groceries, where again, it still goes through the same sort of flows under the hood, but there might be some additional elements like a stock picker, again a different calculation which is now completely flexible depending on what you've picked, and again it still ends up being charging out the door. So as you can see, there's lots of different ways, different things at the start, different calculations, different payment methods, but it all flows through the same end to end, if you like.
So we're back to that control plane or that core engine, those certain parts which are core to how this all works. So David, why event-driven? We can see event-driven here. Why event-driven?
Well, I guess you can Google it, and there's a word salad of reasons of why people like event-driven. So it's for scale, loose coupling, adaptability, those types of things. And that's nice, but there's a couple of other things that are really useful about it. So when you actually have a genuinely fully end-to-end event-driven platform, it actually becomes really simple to connect systems together and essentially introduce and extend the platform to do more things. So if you think about it as a chain, entitlement management is one piece, and the next link is a subscriptions management piece, for want of a better description. It's billing in reality, because subscriptions is just a specialization of it. And then the next chain link after that is the payments piece. Now, they do feed back into each other, but they feed back in terms of events as well. So if there's a failed charge, the billing system might know. And if the billing system decides that failed charge has been going on for too long, for whatever reason, we have business rules to do it, it might feed back to the entitlement management piece to, for example, cancel a subscription. That is actually really quite simple to do at scale, but still provide a simple API over the top for public consumption. Another thing that's sort of on the non-functional side of things, and I've already alluded to it already, about maintaining correctness and flexibility is one thing, correctness and fault tolerance. So if there's messages in these pipes and these arrows, for example, and you have an outage, these can be recovered, they can be replayed, and systems can continue. So it's kind of important to us that every step within these components is quite small and atomic, and they're actually internally all very event-driven as well.
And you're teasing people on the third point or the second point about fault tolerance there. So it's a really good point though in terms of the event driven and how it enables us to do it. But what about this data platform that you use?
Well, that's kind of our superpower. So we have a platform that transacts using ultimately with a thing called event sourcing, where the data that we persist is the data that's used to drive behavior. That means that every system that gets those events gets exactly the same data as the system that's creating it and using it to process. But also, those systems don't have to be the only consumers, and we divert all of our traffic down to our data platform. So our data platform sees every event that the transactional systems use and produce. And they're not a copy or a mapping, they are byte for byte the same events. So we can build up a hugely powerful picture in our data platform of everything that's going on in the transactional systems.
Okay, and talking of that data platform and event-driven, it really is Product and Engineering Day here at Bango, as one of our colleagues, Manuel, has been speaking at the AWS Summit at the Excel in London today, and that's really all about that piece of our technology platform. And you can read about that blog here on the blog here, and it'll be exactly the same. It's talking exactly about this event-driven architecture for the scale that we need to achieve. So let's move on to point number 2. And what we're talking about here is the designing for fault tolerance. Joe, tell us a bit more.
Sure. So at some point, something's going to go wrong. And it really doesn't matter how well designed or how well tested your software is. Mistakes can happen. And in some cases, the things that go wrong aren't necessarily in your ability to control anyway. So lots of companies, for example, have cloud-based architecture. Those platforms are fantastic, geared for scale and protection. But any company can have unexpected issues. I mean, just look at the power outage experienced in Portugal and Spain earlier this week, and look at the number you can see on screen. And basically, if this happens to us, new requests for subscription bundling wouldn't get to us, but there are also going to be requests in flight. And one of the key things is what happens to those. So I'm going to hand over to David to tell us a bit more.
So, yeah, I guess the thing that I'm always thinking about is what happens when the music stops. Yeah. So we just assume that at some point we're going to have a catastrophic outage. But sort of rewinding from that, you do get occasional things. So in a data center with 10,000 servers, a network switch is going to fail at some point. And if your traffic is going through that, it needs to be routed around. Now, our infrastructure engineers are awesome, and those network glitches are ephemeral, to say the most. They're very short-lived. But if you're in the middle of an interaction with another system, you need to be able to go, oh, well, that glitched, and step over it and retry. So the designs or the approach that we use is essentially the same in terms of a short-term, very ephemeral glitch versus a absolute 100% system outage. And the way that we do that is really, it's subtle. It's actually quite simple, but it's really powerful. So when we're designing, and this all goes back to the design is always products and features, but from a technology perspective, it's non-functional requirements. And what I mean by that is all these types of things that go wrong in edge cases. So when we're designing, we're looking at not only the business data, but we're looking at sort of introducing metadata into the business data if necessary to make the business data describe how to recover itself. Or actually more simply than that, sometimes the business data is enough. So this diagram actually shows a tremendous amount. It's deceptively simple, but it's got a couple of important points on it. This is an invoice. There will be millions of these, and it has a life cycle. So you can see it's initialized, it's calculated. I've introduced 2 calculations to show that we can recalculate, and that's fine. The first thing to bear in mind is we have a rule that says it can only be initialized once. There's no way, if there's a marble, for another marble to come in and fill that slot. So if you have a rogue process that you're not going to, and it's producing bad data, or whatever, you're not going to end up with multiple identical invoices with the same person. And then likewise, at the end, issuing an invoice for payment, we have a rule as well that says that you can only issue once. Now, that rule is not just a bit of code that says if the current state is issued. It's a database check constraint. So it's impossible for us to add the wrong data. Now, imagine that invoice issued is just about to arrive in that database hole, and the power stops. What state's the system in? Well, we know, looking at it, that the invoice has not been issued, and we'll know from the calculation event just before it that we tag it's chargeable, that it should be issued. So we know what the recovery step is just by the business data alone. And then we can recover. And then once it is issued, we know that it's happened exactly once, essentially.
Fantastic. So thanks very much, David. I think that's a really good example. Now, we are running a little short on time for our usual slot. We've got one more example, but I want to give every bit of time to talk about it. And we're going to talk about designing for scale. So fluctuating traffic is just a thing that we experience, right, Joe?
Yeah, and lots of things can cause it. So it could be anything from a successful advertising campaign that coincides particularly with a seasonal event like Black Friday. But it could also be something like you're enhancing an existing offer that you have with an existing bundle customer base, and all of those customers get access to the new component of that offer on the same date. Or maybe you always process your subscriptions at month end, so there's a massive surge in traffic at month end. These things are inevitable, and it's really important for us to be able to handle these surges as well as the quieter periods without breaking the bank, and also without overwhelming our partners. Because of course, it's not just our systems that we need to be concerned about. We've got to protect them to make sure that all of the requests are successful end to end. So, David, how are we handling this?
Yeah, so I always use the analogy. It's a bit like a Formula One car. So I do apologise to those who aren't interested in watching people going around in circles for 2 or 3 hours. But basically, in Formula One, it's all about the tyres and the brakes and using aerodynamics at speed. So cars that have cold tyres, cold brakes, and are not going very fast will slide off the road more readily than those that are going faster. It doesn't mean that they're not faster than your normal road car. They still are. They will get around the track faster than a road car, but they're not as fast as they're not going to break any records. They're not as fast as they could be. And our system's a bit like that. So we have our system wants to go fast. So it wants to open database connections. It wants to establish TCP sessions. That's for sort of API interactions. And once it's established those, it's going to keep them alive and use those for traffic. And they'll be very fast and very low latency, because the real cost in a distributed platform isn't really the processing. It's the interaction with, in terms of timeless, it's the interaction with the database. That can take time. We use NoSQL predominantly to make that incredibly fast. But the really, really sort of strange non-functional one that people who aren't aware of what's going on in the technology space is when a computer wants to connect to another computer, and to do it securely, it needs to set up an encrypted connection. And there's a back and forth and a huge amount of maths going on to do that. It's compute heavy and it takes a measurable amount of time. So the less that we have to do that, and the less that we have to shut down idle connections, the better. So basically, our platform wants more traffic. Yeah. Now, the flip side of that is that when we scale up and tires are warm, everything's going smoothly, and we're racing along, we are fully aware that we could then impact our downstreams, which might be our partner systems. So, for example, we might have a midnight month-end subscription renewal task, but we have a million subscriptions to renew. Now, we could quite conceivably say we're going to do that at 5,000 transactions per second or subscriptions per second and be done in about 4 minutes. But we're pretty likely to have flooded and overwhelmed our partners when we do that. So we're pretty careful about that. And we have introduced and use ways of rate limiting our traffic so that we can still serve everybody at scale, but not overwhelm individual partners. And our rate limiting essentially allows us to focus on individual partners, maybe individual products, maybe just a sort of an area, for example, subscriptions versus fixed term renewals, for example. It's pretty sophisticated, but it does allow us to target really quite closely and basically protect everybody from being too fast. And the technical term that's used a lot is thundering herds. Essentially, we overwhelm systems by just sending too much data to them too fast.
I like that. I like that. It's a really good analogy as well as a term. So there are obviously lots of things to consider then, Joe.
For sure, yes. But the really good news is that while this bundling market is moving really quickly, we can as well. And we're already able to do all of these things, which makes life a lot simpler for our partners. So the DVM is purpose-built for channel success. We continually invest in it, evolve our SaaS product to enable our partners basically to sort of create and manage their offers quickly and easily and with confidence. So.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Joe. Thanks, David. There we have it. We've lifted the lid on how offer management is built. And with that, we come to our Q&A section. We are running a couple of minutes over. Hopefully you can stay for some Q&A. We've got a question in the chat and we've got a couple of questions we want to go through. So, Joe, I'll come to you with the question in the chat first, as we had a live chat. So thank you very much, Jane. Her question is, some markets mandate notifications to the end user when going from free to paid plans. How do you support this with DVM?
So we do support notifications that go out. We don't go direct to consumer, but we send end of phase and renewal notifications out to our resale partners, enabling them to then communicate with the customer. And that's partly because obviously the communication really needs to come from the reseller. That's the person the consumer is familiar with. But yes, we certainly have the ability to, and we do, send, as I said, renewals and end of phase notifications in advance of those things happening. So where, for example, in America, you have requirements to send these things a certain number of days prior to the event happening, we do that too, and we can be flexible on when they're sent out.
So all that compliance with automatic renewal laws, no problem in terms of all the notifications that billing engine is sending out. Great. So David, come to you. Can you share an example of a sort of a use case that's come up that has really impacted in terms of the way you've designed and the way you've architected and talked about the system today?
Okay. Here's one that it was a curveball, but it's kind of important, I suppose. So one of our partners. So conceptually, a renewal creates an invoice which creates a charge, and you might naively think that a charge is just like a one-off. So at the bottom of every invoice, you get the amount to be paid and you pay it. But some people don't want or need that. They need different levels of granularity. So they might, for example, say that we want to charge the base price, and then if there's any kind of premium uplift, or you've gone from, say, basic tier to a premium tier on a content provider, they might want to differentiate that on a customer's bill. So we might need to issue two charges. Now, a system, if you sort of merrily sat in a corner and built the perfect invoicing system, would struggle, because then you suddenly be faced with, oh, how do I make that possible? And then you have to bolt something on and fix it around it. So because we spend a lot of time designing and thinking and knowing some of these things, we don't have a model that does that. We have a model that allows any number of items to be charged for and any number of charges to be issued. It's just the use case typically is sort of one subscription and one charge, but the system is not constrained to that. It can do any number of charges.
As a really good example, that kind of dynamic building of the invoice to again, it talks really well to that core that doesn't change, and it's flexible to all these different use cases. Great stuff. So Joe, coming to you with the last question. Then how do you ensure offer management remains future-proof, especially with new subscription models and payment methods emerging every year?
Okay, so I think probably one of the most important things is to continue to observe market trends, particularly data analysis over time, and really think through as many scenarios as you can as you go. We've seen a lot of big shifts recently in bundling and billing models like pay-per-view, but these aren't going to be the only ones. So it's about doing everything you can to really be ready for the next wave of flows that come through.
All right. Thank you very much, Joe. Jane, I hope we answered your question in the chat. Ben, thanks very much for letting me take over today. And as usual, I've run over. That's pretty typical. But I hope you really enjoyed the extra bit of content and everything we've talked today about sort of breaking that lid open and having a look inside the DVM and offer management.
Yeah, thank you very much, speakers. And tune in for the next edition of Bytesize, which will be at the end of May. And we've got something special, hopefully, cooking for this one. So watch out this space, and we'll see you soon. Thanks a lot for joining.